Alrighty, welcome back to Art for O.U.R's YouTube channel. This is Dan Preece, your crazy late night garage host. When your wife of 18 years says she'd like a yarn bowl, the mother of your 4 children who's put up with your crap forever, you make it. I'm usually pretty good at giving gifts, but I was drawing a blank this year for Christmas, and she's recently gotten into knitting hats and socks and stuff. She has a niece on the way from her sister, and so she's been making a lot of stuff and wanted a knitting bowl. And I have found that I really don't like doing commissions work. I love making up the next idea, creating it, and see if I can execute it. I used to do more commission work, and I found it was just stressing me out. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and it never turns out exactly how you want. And I was worried about the expectations of the customer, and so I've sworn that off. I don't do that anymore. I really appreciate people who have made requests, but it kind of was turning into a job, and I just decided it wasn't good for my health. The stress was too much. So anyway, the exception is the lady who you've been with for a long time. she she gets a pretty strong vote. So, deep down, I was like, okay, if I'm gonna make a yarn bowl, which is one of the classic things wood turners make, there's no way I'm making it in a normal fashion. And so I kicked around some ideas for a few weeks, and this is what came out the other end. Yarn in resin in a yarn bowl. So we'll see how this turned out. You saw my sketch there, the initial idea, and this is one of those projects that actually came out pretty close to what I was thinking. So I was pretty proud of that. This was a piece of cherrywood that was donated by one of my patients. The gift that keeps on giving me. He gave me a whole bunch of wood, so it's been drying in my garage, and it's great stuff. It has great color. Somebody asked me the other day, why don't you make your tenon on the other side when you're turning? And doesn't really bother me to make it on this end. In either way, you end up a little bit in the middle. You have to kind of work out, so it doesn't seem to make a difference to me. But I do like doing tenons. The clamp that holds it on kind of squeezes the wood together, as opposed to the other version of clamping a bowl onto the lathe where you're expanding the jaws of your chuck. I just don't think you can trust wood that much. You can grip it, but squeezing it apart, if it cracks it, all you're toast. So I've never had the guts to try that direction. This chuck does have teeth for that, or the jaws for that, but I've just never given it a try. Maybe one day, but it does make a much more elegant finish when you do that. You have to deal with the tenon otherwise, but it seems to be safer. So I always end up having to grind away the little bit that sticks out, but that's not too big a deal. Now, I am not afraid of using rotten wood, which is probably stupid because it's not as stable. And you can see me having to use some of the CA glue to stabilize the tenon here. But that stuff's amazing. I mean, it'll turn wood into really hard material, a very tough material. And since I'm using the tailstock there and supporting the whole thing, wasn't too worried about it. Especially when I'm planning on dunking the whole thing in resin, that really stabilizes the wood, and it's safer than anything after that. So knowing that, I wasn't too worried about it. Now, one thing that's really hard about this windows in the wood idea that I've been flogging to death for the last few projects is that you have to think in, the 3D in the planes that you're working in. If the window isn't exactly the same depth all the way around, whatever the subject is you're putting in there isn't going to come out equal on all sides as you turn it, obviously. And one of the mistakes I made on this project was it was a little deeper in some places. And I thought I was aware of that, but I thought it'd be okay because the big rope of yarn you'll see me make, I thought it'd be big enough that even if I got into it, it would look cool anyway and it'd be fine. But I almost lost it in one place because it was so deep. So it doesn't turn out as symmetrical and as perfect as I'd hoped. But you live and you learn. But that's something that was tricky. And one of the reasons it got so deep is because of the unstable, rotten part of the wood, which in the end turned out to be the most beautiful piece or part of it. But that was the price I paid. These angle grinders are simply fantastic. The cutting wheel and the sanding wheel make short work of this process. It's taken me a while to find my groove, but man, when you do that, you can crank it out in a short time. What before would take me a long time trying to chisel it out or what have you. This is a file sander, which is fantastic. You put all kinds of grits of sandpaper on there, and it's like a miniature table sander you can shove in different corners. Makes for easy working in tight spots. So I showed a bottle of mousse. I've said this before. One of my problems is I try out these new ideas, and of course it never works out perfectly because it's always an experiment. And I'm sitting here trying to figure out how in the heck can I get these yarn strands to kind of bind together because it is kind of hairy and frizzy. So I thought, well, why not mousse? And I think it was a good idea, except for this mousse didn't really set up. You live and you learn. If I were to do this again, I would use hairspray or something that was quite clear so I could mold it into this shape I liked and then minimize the super glue usage. Now here's something I haven't done before, and this has solved a lot of my resin problems. I've dealt with two problems. Miniature bubbles in the resin, which are just suspended from mixing it, especially when you're doing large volumes. You can't spend a lot of time mixing it because it's going to start setting up. So it means you're mixing it at a high speed, which is going to introduce bubbles. That's a problem. You get these little micro bubbles, even with this awesome Fathom thick set resin by Total Bow, which is my go-to. They're also one of my sponsors. Even with that thick set stuff, because it takes so long to set up, most of the bubbles, the big bubbles, rise to the surface because of the time available, but the micro bubbles don't. And so that's problem number one. Problem number two has been bubbles coming up through the wood. I don't know what the deal is, but if you look at this at a project, I don't know, 3/4 of the way in before the resin sets up too much, it looks crystal clear. No bubbles, nothing happening. But right when the resin starts to harden, for some reason the wood starts to bubble. And I don't know if that's moisture in the wood, could be, that's a common theme, or if it's just a chemical reaction and the hardening of the resin allows bubbles to form. I couldn't tell you, but here's the thing that went really well with this. So I've discovered that the vacuum chamber, if you run it long enough, will degas your resin from the microbubbles, and that works out beautiful. And if you put your piece of wood in the resin in your vacuum chamber, every time you run through a cycle of degassing it, the air in the wood gets sucked out to some degree, and as you drop the pressure, the resin gets sucked in its place. And so I did it multiple times. I didn't quite get it to the point though where the bubbles completely disappeared. I needed a bigger container to let it fizz up and bubble, and it took over an hour to get as far as I got, and I thought, I just can't do this anymore. I got to go to bed. So I put it in a pressure pot, same size, to squeeze out the micro bubbles, and I was praying that I'd done enough of the vacuum work, and lo and behold, this turned out absolutely perfect. So the wood was infused with resin. It didn't bubble from hidden cracks in container or cracks in, what am I trying to say, little spaces in the wood. There were no micro bubbles because apparently I was able to degas it and then compress it in the pressure pot long enough, and it worked out great. So that, folks, obviates the need for cactus juice or sealing the wood beforehand. There's all these steps that people have suggested, which are great suggestions, but introduce another step. Since I need to degas the resin anyway or put it in a pressure pot, I decided to do both, and worked out great. So it took me a while to get to this point, try to figure out how to most quickly and easily get rid of all sources of bubbles, and I will definitely be doing this again. So again, I ran it in the pressure pot for about an hour and a half. I'm sorry, not the pressure pot, the vacuum chamber for an hour and a half. Didn't quite degas it completely, and then I stuck it in the pressure pot until the resin set up, which with this Fathom thickset resin by Total Boat took a couple of days, which is fine. I wanted it to be a very slow resin to let any possible bubbles rise if it needed to be. And if there's one thing I can say about this project, as crazy as it turned out, no bubbles. So I'm very excited about that. If you've watched any of my previous videos, I have struggled mightily with the bubble problem. And the way I do my projects, you can't always coat it and treat it and do different things. So I'm quite excited about this quote unquote discovery. It's not really my discovery, but just putting different processes together that people have suggested, and worked out great. If you are new to this channel, you know that I'm a hobbyist. I love to paint, do wood carving, wood turning, and that. At some point in the past, I decided to start selling projects to raise money for Operation Underground Railroad. This led to starting a website called art4OUR.org, and we're getting close to 80 artists who've donated different things, everything from jewelry, t-shirts, to high-end oil paintings, carving, you name it. Any bit of artwork you can imagine. We've had donated music. Anywhere from 60 to 100% of the profit from these sold items goes to Operation Underground Railroad. These guys are the amazing folks who go around the world trying to save kids, women, whoever, from sex trafficking operations, which are far more prevalent than you would guess, unfortunately. So far, Operation Underground Railroad was started in 2013, and so far they've saved, I want to say, about just over 4,000 kids. They've helped arrest 2,000 plus pedophiles or otherwise traffickers. So amazing work they're doing. This very expensive process, so we're hoping to raise as much money and at least awareness as possible. So you can buy items at Art4OUR. You can make a direct donation, pick up a t-shirt. We've even got freeze-dried candy on there. Every little bit helps. Now here's where I got in trouble with my yarn rope not being at a equal depth throughout the project. I realized as I was turning, if you watch closely there, you can see me turning before, and you can see the light coming through, so I can see how deep I'm getting. And I realized I was about to run out of depth of the rope and lose it completely. So I had to stop and just sand in very specific spots to get rid of the wood wall so you could see through and create the window effect of just the clear resin. Unfortunately, that means you get a very uneven surface inside the bowl, which makes for a perfect sanding and finish very, very challenging. So it didn't turn out as clear as possible, but that's because of that, not so much the resin. I did end up having to do a bit by hand, which I spared you the joy of watching me do, which is fine. I'm usually out in my shop somewhere between 9 and midnight and listen to some books on tape or good music and let the stress of the day go by. That's why I'm out there. And it's amazing that this has been able to be parlayed into doing this work for Operation Underground Railroad, and that people care and watch. It's amazing. So thank you for your support. See you on the flip side for the next project. Have a Merry Christmas, y'all. Before I forget, we have two artists who have donated some music to Art for O.U.R. The first one you'll hear at the end of this video is Josh North. This song is called The God Who Reigns. It's kind of a Christian song. You can read about him at Art for O.U.R. I'll put a link in the video. And then the second one is my niece, Shay Preece. The song is called Goodnight, Mr. Moon. Both great songs. If you like them, you can buy them at Art for O.U.R. A portion of it goes to Operation Underground Railroad.
Creator who gave breath to my lungs is the God who reigns today. Protector who keeps me safe from harm is the God who reigns today. Forever I will always be so lost in awe of the God who unchained me. Forever I will always be so lost in awe of the God who came for me. Hero who saves the broken and lost is the God who reigns today. Redeemer who lights our darkest parts is the God who reigns today. Forever I will always be so lost in awe of the God who unchained me. Forever I will always be so lost in awe of the God who came for me. All I've had was not enough to fill the hole inside my heart. God, you're the only one who does. Father, you love me above all. You're my God who reigns today. Abba, you chose me when I've nothing at all to give to my God who reigns today. Forever I will always be so lost in awe of the God who unchained me. Forever I will always be so lost in awe of the God who came for me. Forever I will always be so lost in awe of the God who unchained me. Forever I will always be so lost in awe of the God who came for me. Of the God who unchained me. God who came for me.
Bright stars up above me, getting tucked in by me. I got only my nightlight. Sure wish it would shine bright like you. So good night, Mr. Moon.
And I hate it when the clouds move in front of your beautiful face, yeah. Oh, I wish I could be with you. Good night, Mr. Moon.
Light home, la da 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 dum. La da 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 dum. I say good night, Mr. Moon. You shine through my window, I snuggle into my pillow. I don't need the sun, I can always count on you. Good night, Mr. Moon. Light on, light da 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 dum. La da 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 dum. Oh, you've got one of those smiles that lights up the sky for miles and miles. Although I try and try, I just can't reach up to your height. Maybe I can let her fly too. Mr. Moon, I miss you so bad. My heart is weeping and my eyes are sad. Mr. Moon, I miss you so bad. My heart is weeping and my eyes are sad. I say good night, Mr. Goodnight. Oh, good night, Mr. Goodnight. Good night, Mr. Moon. La da 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 la da da da, yeah. La da 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 do. I say good night, Mr. Moon. Light on, light da 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 dum. La da 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 dum. I say good night, Mr.